Hey, what's up? Trance here, one of the best Slowspire players in the world. I stream over on Twitch at twitch.tv/TranceMHS. You can go over there and check out some of my gameplay live and ask some questions. If you have anything that you're specifically looking for. Today in this video I want to talk about Ironclad. More specifically, I want to talk about his card choices in Act 1. Now, Slowspire is a game where things can change and you have to be very flexible and you have to be able to adapt and make choices based on other information that you have already. But I do think it is very important that there is a baseline and not exactly a guide, but yeah, just a baseline for things that are generally good to do, things that are generally not so good to do, and are a lot more situational. So I want to I made a tier list of the cards, of the common and uncommon cards. I excluded rare cards since you will not see them very often in Act 1. I've also excluded relic considerations, as those can't be really predicted at all. There's so many different relics that could take you in so many different directions. I just want to get the most generalized baseline suggestions that could help you guys in your games. Get right into the card. So yeah, we'll just be going over all the common and uncommon cards for the Ironclad. Bring this tier list up here. And so for this tier list, I've broken them up into 5 different sections. For the first section, these are all cards that you're very happy with seeing and will be picking in most of your runs. For the second group, you're still reasonably happy seeing these cards, and they do the job that you want them to do very well, but they're just a lot more situational than the cards in the first row are. In the third row are cards that are extremely situational. These are cards you're not really always happy picking up, and they become a lot better when certain conditions are met. And these are conditions that can be met through other cards that are in Ironclad's toolkit, other cards in the common and uncommon toolkit, not just things that, not always things like relics and things like that. The fourth row that we have here is mostly skills, and skills can be very you have to be very flexible when it comes to picking skills in Act 1, because with Gremlin Knob being an elite, it's very hard to tell exactly how many skills you need before you are past that point where you're done with him, and how many is too much to the point where you won't be able to always convert your energy into damage in that fight. And then lastly, these are cards in row 5 that you almost never want to be picking, and it is very, very extremely situational. And I won't even really be going over these cards specifically, they're just not very good to pick at all. I guess the only thing here, Clash, is a lot more pickable if you're playing at lower ascensions and don't have the curse in your starting deck all the time, but even then it's still pretty situational. There's a lot of enemies that make it not so good. So, before we get into the cards at all, let's just go over real quick the most important things that you're trying to solve. Like, what are your goals for Act 1? And your main goals in Act 1, at least mine are, whenever I enter a run, I'm looking to do as many elites and as many campfires as I can, valuing elites higher as long as I can do them without too much risk. And then your goal is to be able to defeat the Act boss at the end. So, what are the main things that you're really looking for in these fights? In both the Gremlin Knob and the Lagavulin fight, it's mostly about front-loaded damage. For the Gremlin Knob, you're trying to kill before either on the 3rd turn or before the 4th turn, definitely. For the Lagavulin fight, you have up to 3 turns to prepare, You have to get through 2 turns of attacking, and you really, really, really want to be done with the fight by the next time Lagavulin would be attacking. And a lot of the times you sometimes even have to sacrifice your health to deal damage just to make sure that you're killing by that time. And then there's the sentries fight where you really, really want to kill one right away as soon as possible, and then you can start to slowly deal with the third one. But in all these situations, the Nob we have to kill within the first couple of turns, and the Sentry we have to kill one of them, preferably within the first 2 turns. You really, really need that front-loaded damage, and that is what the first row is all about. So at the top of the first row is Carnage. Carnage is an amazing card. 2 costs, deals 20 damage, and then upgrades to 28. Then you add Vulnerable on top of that, 42. That is a ton of damage. Just a Carnage. Any one of the like upgraded-ish attacks that deal like 9. So Carnage plus something that deals 9 in a strike, and you have a Sentry dead and 4 energy already, and then can already like start thinking about like how much health you can try to save in the fight. So yeah, very, very powerful. One of the best front-loaded damage options you can pick on the Ironclad. Next up is Uppercut. Uppercut is way better than your starting source for vulnerable. Bash, it gives you access to weak to the point where you don't even really need to be picking up Clothesline anymore. And it is, I know that the video is mainly about Act 1, but it has big pluses later, being able to strip 2 artifacts for 1 card for something that doesn't exhaust and can apply the debuffs more later. It's just an all-around great card that I'm happy to have in all of my Ironclad runs. Next up, Battle Trance. Battle Trance is absolutely insane. 0 cost, draw 3/4 is what can you like not want about that? I don't think there's a single person that would not want to draw multiple cards for 0 cost. It's even good enough to the point where you take multiples, like you can take up to like 3-ish of them, even though you're not able to draw again after you play the card, but it's absolutely insane. You definitely pick it. Next, Chemokinesis. Chemokinesis is, again, front-loaded damage, matters a lot. Deals 14 damage, upgrades to 18, and it does 3 damage to you and upgrades to 2. Chemokinesis does just a ton of damage. 27 damage with vulnerable is a huge chunk of Gremlin Knob's health, huge chunk of Lagavulin's health. Even when you don't have the vulnerable, dealing 18 and getting rid of that first entry is very, very important. So but the cost, the health loss, is definitely big. So if you're at that point where you have enough damage already, you can definitely skip it if you have damage to get through the elites that you have to fight and the boss you have to fight. Definitely something that you should definitely consider skipping. But if you don't have your damage set up already, I am a huge fan of Chemokinesis. Next up is Anger. 0 cost attack, deals 6 damage and adds another Anger to your deck. 0 cost attacks are amazing and pretty much exactly what Ironclad wants. There's so many 2 cost attacks that you want to be picking, whether it be Carnage, Uppercut, Clothesline, and the Bash that you already start with in your deck. And being able to have something that costs 0, like Bash and Uppercut, these are cards that increase your damage output, but they cost 2 to actually get put into play. So having something that's 0 so you can actually make use of the cards that you draw on those turns where you do put that vulnerable into play is very, very important and very, very powerful. Next up is Inflame. Adding strength is just very good in general, especially for a class that mainly does damage in the beginning through vulnerable, which makes the strength even more powerful, and it opens up some other options for attacks that you aren't as into picking without having it. And just after 3 attacks. After 2 attacks, it's the same as a strike. And then after you play the 3rd attack, then it's better. So especially for those longer fights, it makes a really big deal. And there's even the shorter fights like Lagavulin where you have the time to set it up. Absolutely amazing. It's just strength. Having strength is very, very good. Then we get to the more... These cards are all like very close in what they do, but they do these things very well and aren't very situational at all, which is why they're still in this grouping. Twin Strike, Headbutt, and Pommel Strike. They deal 10, 9, and 9 respectively. Headbutt puts a card from your discard pile on top of your deck. Pommel draws a card. And Twin Strike is just pure damage, but it does scale with strength. I am a big fan of Headbutt. It has a lot of utility. It's just pretty nice to have. I probably would put Twin Strike right under that, where you're not too concerned with the 1 draw that Pommel Strike gives you, but you're okay with the 9 damage, and there's like some synergies with it being a card that says strike on it. And then Twin Strike, just the ability to scale with strength, definitely is a big plus, as well as it does 1 more damage than the other 2 just innately. Armament is a pretty situational card for being within this row. It's something that is extremely powerful when upgraded, or something that you take because you like need that block card, and it just helps make your other block cards good, as well as just all unupgraded cards in your deck, even when you're not exactly able to upgrade it right away. But it is insanely powerful against Lagavulin and the boss fights, especially Lagavulin, and well, it's especially powerful versus Lagavulin Guardian. A little bit less so against Slime Boss. You don't really always have the time to spend an energy not dealing damage, and a little bit less powerful against Hexagos, as Hexa dilutes your deck a little more, so you don't get to constantly see the cards you're upgrading, but it's still very, very powerful versus Hexa. And then it's powerful versus Sentries, as well as when you get it on your first rotation, because you're just when you're drawing those hands that don't have full playable cards that you can play, you want the cards that you draw to be upgraded, right? So it can just be very, very powerful in those longer fights. Lastly is Clothesline. Clothesline is about the same as 2 strikes damage wise, and then you also get the weak added on, so definitely a big upgrade as far as your starter deck is concerned. And enemies dealing 25% less damage for the rest of the run seems like pretty good whenever you're able to put it in play. So weak is just a very strong keyword within the game. Moving on to the second row, where things get a little more situational. There's Combust. Combust can be extremely powerful against Slime Boss and Sentries. Not too bad versus some of the AoE hard pull fights, and not even completely terrible against like Gremlin Knob or Lagavulin. It does get into a little bit of a rough spot against both Hexagos and Guardian, which can be, well, Guardian's just a longer fight in general, so it's going to deal a lot of damage to you. And the Hexagos fight, you generally start at a pretty low life total anyway, so the health that you have to spare and your block density becomes a big factor in it, and it's not always something that you want to have. Then there's Spot Weakness, which is an absolutely amazing strength source. You're able to play it multiple times and like actually have it as a win condition later on, but it is a very, very situational card early. You can't really play it during Lagavulin setup phase. You can play it during the Sentry's initial phase, which is completely fine. And you can't really play it during the like free turn that you have for Gremlin Knob either. So it can definitely be pretty situational. Very, very strong against Hexagos. Extremely situational against Slime Boss. And then against Guardian, it's very good as well. So it's just a pretty situational card as far as the early gamer has fights where it's very, very powerful and then fights where it really doesn't do as much for you, but even in those fights it's still okay. Next we have Perfected Strike, which I like to think of as Carnage minus. It fills that same role as Carnage, but you have to... You're committing an upgrade to both, but Perfected Strike wants you to keep cards in your deck that you want to be getting rid of later, and also doesn't exhaust at the point where it starts to fall off. It's just worse than Carnage in almost every way, except for, yeah, it's basically worse than Carnage in almost every way, but it is very powerful, like getting you through elites, and very powerful in slime boss acts. You take it when you need it, but as soon as you get to the point where you don't need it, you avoid it completely. Whirlwind's AoE, it unupgraded is worse damage output than a strike for single target fights, so it can be a little iffy and can actually just feel bad to have sometimes if you don't have a path that can upgrade it very well, or maybe you're in a position where you're not fighting that many hard pool fights, so you don't have to worry about AoE that much, but it can definitely be a very powerful card. Just try and make sure you're able to upgrade it or have some strength source, or really need that AoE and have your single target fights in a pretty decent position. Next up is Infernal Blade, which I think is probably a pretty undervalued card. I think that Infernal Blade is extremely strong, especially when upgraded. Kind of like I was saying with Anger before, it can be a zero cost attack, essentially, and that's just really strong for a class that is very happy taking 2 cost attacks. So yeah, I would definitely, like, if you don't have your damage completely squared away and you have the free upgrade, even when you don't, I would definitely consider Infernal Blade a lot more. Next up is Thunderclap and Cleave. Now, I have mostly liked Cleave, and I've liked it over Thunderclap for like a very long time. I think the main reasons for this is when it's upgraded, and then you get like even a little bit of strength, it hits breakpoints that Thunderclap almost never will hit. Like sometimes it can kill that like group of slimes, or it can kill that gremlin in one shot if you give it just like a little bit of help after the upgrade. Whereas Thunderclap won't really be doing that. But if you look at the other way where you aren't getting that extra little boost, Thunderclap plus Strike still kills like one of those enemies, either the slime or the gremlin for the most part. Thunderclap plus Strike will still kill them. And it's just very strong when you have that Perfected Strike or Carnage, being able to, like, because those are 2 cost cards and deal so much damage, not always able to play the bash along with it. As well as fights like Hexaghost, which can kind of be a damage race. It's very important that you keep your vulnerable up for most of the time, so definitely a big boost out of Thunderclap, and I've opened up more to it recently. Next up in this row is Rampage. Rampage is a card that can kind of be a win condition. I'm very open to Headbutt, and it works very well with that. It's just damage when you need it. It's very good against Hexaghost, very good against Guardian. Okay against Slime Boss. Okay against Lagavulin. Just an attack against Gremlin Up, so you're happy. And not too bad versus Sentries either, although you probably see it like a second time and that's it. Maybe very rarely a third time. But yeah, it's a damage that can be a win condition for as long as until the end of the Act 2 boss, so definitely something to be open to for sure. And lastly within this row is Evolve, which is a very situational card, but at the same time not that situational and the kind of effect that you want. You can say that like Evolve and Fire Breathing are in different rows, but they have like the same activator, but it's very, very different, like how much you want these things going later into the run. Being able to draw cards whenever you receive a status is very, very good, and Act 1 is probably the most incentive that you have to have an evolve outside of Act 4 as far as the enemies that you're facing. 3 very, very important enemies uh, you get a benefit out of, and you only really take it in acts that you have either Slime Boss or Hexaghost as the final boss. Less so against Guardian unless you have reasons in your deck already, whether it be like a power through or something like that. But it helps out a lot for the Sentries fight, not having to deal with the Daze. And it helps out a lot, so much in the Slime Boss fight as well. And then in the Hexaghost fight, it helps as well, dealing with the burns and having hands where you can actually utilize your mana. It's just a very strong card and should almost always be picked in Slime Boss and Hexa Axe, just because of how powerful it is in those fights, as well as helping you with the Sentries. Moving on to these next couple of rows, I won't be going as into detail. I'll kind of just be addressing things that I think are a little bit interesting, and where I feel like there may be more questions as to, oh, why this is a pretty reasonable card, this is a pretty bad card, why is it where it's at? Just quickly, Reckless Charge is a 0-cost attack, and you're not as bothered by the days in the early game. So those runs where you have 3 energy and you need just a little more damage output to do your elites, it is definitely something to consider more. The 2 strength scaling cards, both Pummel and Sword Boomerang, these cards are not good without strength in the early game. They drop off against Lagavulin, where after the debuff they deal a lot less damage. Sword Boomerang against Sentries is very bad because you're mostly trying to single target one sentry down, and a lot of the AoE fights you're kind of trying to hit the primary target then move on. So yeah, it's definitely something that you really don't want without having strength. Wild Strike is pretty obvious, you don't want the status. Heavy Blade costs a lot and doesn't really get upgrades unless you have strength, and even when you have a little bit of strength, it's not great. Iron Wave is not amazing. Body Slam is kind of cool when you have things like Armaments Plus. Definitely consider Armaments. Definitely consider Body Slam a lot more. But without that, you're not really picking that much block in the early game, so pretty situational. I think Fire Breathing is one that should definitely be talked about. It's the same as Evolve. It's just less of a desirable thing later on. Like, you'll definitely have other ways to deal damage, but you won't always have things to give you draw and get to your important cards when you're seeing statuses later in the game, which is why I have them in separate tiers. But Fire Breathing is absolutely amazing for the Slime Boss fight and the Sentries fight, and pretty good in Hexaghost fight, and would definitely take it as the same way I would take Evolve. It's just a less desirable effect. And then the 4th row is skills and block mostly. These are things that are just like very situational. You have to kind of figure out where you are in the run at that point with Gremlin Ob and with Gremlin Ob, with Guardian. If you need like a big block for Lagavulins as sentries just to like better spend your energy. If you need a little bit more block density in the Hexaghost fight because you're going to be starting the fight at low HP and you need to at least be able to survive the first couple of attacks without not drawing any defense and just straight up dying. Yeah, it's very situational. There's no good way to generalize these things. The only thing is disarm. Try and take that after you're done with it. Like, it's not good against Snob, it's not good against Sentries, but it's very, very good against both Guardian Hexaghost and later in the game. So just be like a little careful with the disarm maybe. But yeah, for the most part, you take the skills and block as needed. Then the last row is just things that are almost completely unpickable. I know Clash is a big favorite for people when they're climbing the Ascensions, but there's a lot of enemies that add stasses to your deck. There's Hexaghosts, there's Slime Boss, there's Sentries. You really, really don't want to deal with having a card that is just unplayable when you draw it. Yeah, and for the most part, I don't even think that I really have to even argue for a lot of these cards. They're just things you almost never want to pick, are extremely situational for your typical start of the run. But yeah, that's it for the Ironclad uncommons and commons. Let me know what you thought about these opinions and any things that you want me to clarify down in the comments. Remember to like and subscribe, and you can check me out live on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/DarrenSamHS if you want to see me play live, put these theories or thoughts into practice and kind of get more of a feel of me playing and adapting to different situations that come up, so that you don't just have the basic guideline, you get like examples of other situations and things like that. And also for this month of September, you can, if you want to support me, you could subscribe on my Twitch channel for 20% off, as well as if you have Amazon Prime, you can subscribe for free. So yeah, thank you for watching the video, and I will see you later.